Place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning, happy Boxing Day and welcome to Today with Tom Harwood and Olivia Utley. Now, Britons face serious travel disruption this Boxing Day as railway workers go on strike again amid a dispute over pay.
Later on in the programme, we'll be joined by the presenter of How Clean Is Your House, Aggie McKenzie, who'll be giving us top tips on how to organise your house after those festive celebrations.
Plus, we'll be debating all of this with the political commentator Albi Amankona. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
Tom and Olivia, thank you very much. Good morning and happy Boxing Day. It's 1 minute past 10 and I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. At least 30 people are believed to have died as a result of a severe Arctic freeze that continues to grip much of the US and Canada. Officials say the worst hit area is the city of Buffalo in New York State. Amid the snow, ice and freezing temperatures, thousands of flights have been cancelled and more than 150,000 homes are still without power. That's down from 1.5 million on Christmas Day. Russia's defence ministry claimed 3 of its military personnel have been killed at an airbase hundreds of miles from the front line of its war with Ukraine. Moscow alleged they were hit by falling debris from a Ukrainian drone that it says was shot down. The governor says no aircraft was damaged at the base in Russia's southeast. It's the second attack on the military site this month. It's understood it stores long-range strategic bombers. Kyiv has not yet commented on the incident. The final 2 skiers who were missing after an avalanche in the skiing area in Western Austria have now been found. Local reports say the avalanche happened yesterday afternoon and it was initially thought that 10 people had been buried. Helicopters, searchlights and avalanche dogs were used in the operation to locate the missing people after initial fears that they had been buried under the snow. The UK's rail network are effectively shut down today as members of the RMT union hold a fresh round of strike action in a dispute over pay. Hundreds of trains usually run on Boxing Day, but they've all been cancelled and thousands of people have been forced to make alternative plans. The AA expects 15.2 million cars on roads today as a result. Eurostar has also dropped all of its services, which run to London, Paris, Brussels and Amsterdam as a result of the RMT action. Well, travel expert Simon Calder said the strikes are destroying the UK's railways.
1 million people like me who don't have a car or access to a car who have to travel by rail. And to be told, oh, come back middle of January isn't good enough. The rail unions, I think, have completely misjudged it. The government has completely misjudged it. The passenger and the taxpayer are caught up in this middle of this kind of ideological row, and it's absolutely all it's doing is destroying the railways.
Police say a shooting at a pub in Liverpool on Christmas Eve, in which 1 woman was killed, was not a targeted attack. The search is continuing for the gunman who killed the 26-year-old woman in Wallasey on Merseyside. She was celebrating Christmas with friends and family when she was shot and killed. The woman was taken to hospital, where she later died. 4 men were also taken to hospital with gunshot injuries. The UK Health Security Agency will stop publishing COVID-19 data early next month. The chief data scientist says it's no longer necessary as the country is now living with the disease, but that COVID will still be monitored. Data had been published weekly during the peak of the pandemic and every 2 weeks since April this year. And shoppers are expected to spend less in the sales today as the cost of living continues to rise. New research by Barclaycard Payments found the average customer intends to buy £229 worth of items in the post-Christmas sales. That's 4% less compared to last year. The study also found that a number of shoppers expect to turn to reselling sites to buy items or to offload unwanted presents. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Tom and Olivia.
Good morning and welcome to Today with Tom Harwood and Olivia Utley. Today we're talking about the strikes. Thousands of commuters are facing travel chaos this Boxing Day as rail workers strike over a pay dispute. I'll be joined by a former executive member of the RMT union.
Meanwhile, thousands of shoppers are taking to the stores today to enjoy the Boxing Day sales. But experts warn consumers are less likely to splurge this year due to the cost of living crisis.
And showbiz reporter Ellie Phillips will be in the studio talking us through the best and the worst of the Christmas Day specials.
And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Email us on gbviews@gbnews or tweet me at gbnews to have your say.
Well, leading the show this morning, thousands of commuters faced travel disruption after network rail workers continue striking over pay and working conditions.
Network Rail said Britain's railways will remain closed for a second consecutive day. Members of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union remain on strike until 6 a.m. on December the 27th. GB News national reporter Theo Chikumba has the latest. Let's cross live to Birmingham.
Good morning. It's another quiet morning here in Birmingham following Christmas Day and Christmas Eve as well, where there were strikes taking place. But of course, most people were with their families at home. But today it's Boxing Day sales across the country, but the rails remains at a complete standstill. I'm here at Birmingham New Street. I walked through there in the early hours of this morning and all the departure boards are completely empty. And now passengers who may have missed the announcement are coming here and they're being turned away. It's going to be like this until tomorrow, where trains will be running again just after around 7 o'clock in the morning. Depending where you live, it could be after 8 o'clock. So this has been a long-running dispute. The RMT union for several months now having negotiations with the rail delivery group and of course Network Rail, but they simply say the deal that they've been offered isn't good enough for their workers, so in terms of pay, but also conditions and maintenance work, which has been talked about during on social hours on the weekends as well. So disruption is continuing for passengers who rely on using the train. And just another announcement as well, in January, the ASLEF union, which represents train drivers, they'll be striking on the 5th of January. So another day where rail travellers will be faced with disruption as well.
Seems like it's never ending at the moment. Theo, thank you for bringing us the latest there from Birmingham New Street Station. We'll be catching up with you later in the programme. Well, here in the studio now to discuss this further, I'm delighted to be joined by the former Senior Assistant General Secretary of the RMT Union, Steve Headley. Steve, over Christmas, striking over Christmas, is that really proper?
Well, look, people don't want to lose money by going on strike at any time of the year, and it's not a decision that's been taken lightly. But the fault for this strike lies squarely with the government, who have not only not helped, but have been an absolute obstacle to any sort of negotiations. They've tied the hands of the companies, Network Rail and the train operating companies. They've not allowed them to negotiate. They've set limits on their negotiations. And we have a situation where, you know, the whole country's in chaos. And what I have to say to every worker out there, it's not nice not being able to travel around at Christmas. There are bigger things at stake. Your whole national health service is at stake. You know, this is a government that's waging an ideological class war on workers and has been doing so for 10 years. So I would encourage every worker, whether they're in the union or not, to support the nurses on strike by actually taking strike action themselves.
It seems from the polls that public support for these train strikes is ebbing away a little bit. It's lower in December than it was in November. And now only 30% of the public are in support. Is that a bit of a problem for the unions?
Well, I mean, obviously when there are strikes, no one likes not being able to travel around the country and at their convenience. And public support will go down. But ultimately, public support doesn't win disputes. If it was public support, the nurses would be on a hell of a lot more money, and the politicians would be probably on the minimum wage. Ultimately, it's the industrial power that matters. So, yeah, I wouldn't dismiss public support, but it's industrial strength that matters, and that's why I think every worker needs to be fighting for our National Health Service right now.
Of course, industrial strength matters, but don't pennies and pounds matter too? 40% fewer people are now commuting on the railways than did before the pandemic. There's less money going into the railways, and there's an inflationary environment whereby people are asking for higher wages despite less money coming through fares. How does the economics of that possibly add up?
Well, because we have a crazy system that funds the railways. We don't have the companies actually making a profit to fund the railways. What we have is subsidies to private companies. For example, the rolling stock companies, which deal with all the trains and rent them to the train operating companies, paid out 100 million during COVID when no trains were running to their shareholders.
Well, they paid a lot of money to those people working on the railways as well, keeping people in jobs.
Actually, the government did that. The companies didn't pay that. The government paid that. So what we have is a system where hundreds of millions are getting paid out. People haven't had a pay rise in 3 years. People's real terms earnings has gone down by over 20%. And people just aren't having it. They're fighting back, which workers are doing all over the country, and I applaud them for it.
But where's the money going to come from here?
Well, the Tories will have to stop giving their friends huge tax hikes and loopholes where they can stick their money offshore. They'll have to stop funding wars. There's always money for war, isn't there? There's always billions of pounds to send to Ukraine so Russians can kill Ukrainians and Ukrainians can kill Russians. But we need a change. We need a change in the absolute society and the economic system we're living in. We can no longer have this system of capitalism which is geared for profit, which is killing the planet. By the way, the rich know this is going on. That's why they're buying up tracts of lands in New Zealand.
Is there a reason, though, why rail workers should be prioritised for this pay rise? There isn't an ongoing pot. And the median pay for rail workers is over 37,000, which is far higher than the average wage in the country. Why should rail workers be prioritised?
Well, they shouldn't. That's why we should have a general strike. We should have a general strike, not just to change the government, but to change the system, because every worker out there who's been hammered since austerity, since the banks went belly up, and of course, the bankers haven't paid the price for that. It's working class people. That's what we should do. And every worker out there should be fighting for a pay rise as well, and to change the system that we're in.
Well, Steve Headley, thank you very much for joining us this morning and talking through those issues. Really interesting to get that perspective here, of course, on those rail strikes. But to delve further into this, I'm now joined by a Socialist Party industrial organiser and trade unionist, Rob Williams. Rob, thank you for joining us. I suppose you'd be agreeing with a lot of what Steve Headley said there, that you're wanting perhaps a general strike as well?
Of course, I totally agree with the point Steve made, and solidarity to those workers taking action. I mean, at the moment, you said earlier that the support for workers striking is going down. Actually, to have the figures even you're saying is incredible. It shows that there is massive support for workers taking action, and that's because the cost of living crisis is so generalised. You know, the Tories famously and their media would love to separate out workers, divide and rule, you know, that these workers are greedy, etc. But they can't do that when real inflation is at something like 4%. These rail workers are striking for a number of reasons, by the way, to keep the trains safe, etc. But the pay rise that's been imposed on them is like a virtual 10% pay cut. So when the cost of living crisis is so generalised, then workers are supportive of other workers taking action. And as Steve rightly said, you know, at the moment, what is clear is that if workers take action together against what is a weak and divided Tory government, it can push them back, it can push the employers back.
Is there a bit of a danger, though, that these rail workers end up being sort of, if you'll pardon the festive reference, turkeys voting for Christmas? We know that commuting is already down, so train travel is reliant on people doing leisure trips and visiting their friends and family. It's also being said that the border force seems to be working much better without border force workers. So is there a danger that these industries just become hollowed out and people lose their jobs because they're overplaying their hand?
Well, first of all, if these strikes weren't effective, then you wouldn't be running a programme about it and we wouldn't have the barrage of propaganda. The truth is, these strikes are incredibly effective. Look, the government won't negotiate with the nurses. They won't negotiate on pay with the nurses leaving them with a 10% pay cut. That is because this government is weak. It's not a position of strength. They don't want to give an inch to anyone because they know the workers generally are feeling the cost of living crisis. The point Steve made is absolutely right. This is a structural, this is a fundamental problem. I've seen a statistic at the start of the rail strikes that if all the subsidies that have been given to the private companies were put together and given as a pay rise, then every rail worker in Britain would get a pay rise, not a pay rate, a pay rise of £60,000 each. That money has been flowing into the coffers of the private sector, of the private rail owners. That's why they should be taken back into public ownership.
Rob Williams, the billions that were spent of taxpayers' money during the pandemic were supporting the jobs of those who worked in the railways. I want to pick up on a point that Steve Headley raised a moment ago, that money is found for perhaps supporting the plight of the Ukrainians. So far, in total, £2.3 billion has been spent on supporting Ukraine, a large sum of money, a transformative sum of money to help those people with their plight. But it's nowhere close to the kind of money that the rail unions, or indeed all the other unions, are asking for. The nurses are asking for a 19% pay rise. That's about £14 billion. The railway workers are asking for double-digit increases as well, running into the perhaps tens of billions of pounds, adding everything up. We are looking at such a vast quantity of money here, nowhere close to any other kind of spending that we've seen recently. I'm sure lots of people can agree on the compassionate case that people need more money. I'm just not sure that anyone's spelled out where on earth this money might come from.
Well, first of all, the reason why workers are asking for the pay rises they are is because real inflation is something like 14%. You're going about the nurses asking for 19%. They're asking for 5% plus inflation. And by the way, they've signalled that they are willing to negotiate with the government. The Tory government don't want to negotiate. But you talk about injections into the economy. Let's be blunt about it. The Tories are not worried about workers. They didn't put that money into the economy because they were worried about workers. They were worried about the economy. And they realised that if workers didn't have an income during COVID, then it would be catastrophic for the economy. But don't forget, the banks were bailed out 14 years ago. They were bailed out billions and billions of pounds. Don't forget, we took some of them into public ownership. I don't know if you remember that. That happened at the time because it was a crisis, by the way, a crisis of the making of capitalism. And the point Steve made there about an alternative society, it's absolutely right. We need a socialist society that brings the main economic levers of the economy into socialist public ownership, because the way things are now, what has happened during COVID, what happened during the banking crisis, is an absolute damning indictment of this capitalist system and the neoliberalism we've had for the last couple of decades.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, Rob Williams, but thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time. Let's bring in now the political commentator Albi Amankona, who's with us throughout the programme today to get your views. I suppose, first of all, it's interesting. We've been talking about the strikes in the specific, but the two commentators we've spoken to have brought it back to the idea of a system, of almost bringing down the government, of replacing capitalism with some utopian form of socialism. Is that what's behind these strikes?
I thought it was quite stark that both of the commentators that were just on were talking about replacing capitalism with socialism. We've got to remember that capitalism is a system which has lifted billions of people out of poverty around the world. And I think the change that needs to happen is actually reforms to our public service. When we look at things like the NHS, when we look at things like the railways, as you mentioned before, we are seeing less commuters, which means less revenue going into the companies, which means that there does need to be reform. We've got things like driver-only operation, which the unions are demanding, is kind of enshrined within working practices. When here in London we have driver-only operation on the tubes, if it's good enough for TfL, why isn't it good enough for the rest of the national railway systems in this country?
It is interesting to see how the railways in this country seem to run on a code of practices that were established decades and decades ago. Even in European countries, you have a lot more modern practices that are far more efficient.
Precisely. I think one of the things which is also quite surprising is that the Sunday rail service literally runs because people choose to go into work on those days rather than it being a proper 7-day-a-week service like we see on the continent. So there are reforms that need to happen on the railways, and that is very much what Mark Harper is saying. He's saying, yes, we can have negotiations, but they've got to include reforms to working practices.
The unions keep claiming that this isn't sort of coordinated strike action, but listening to Steve Headley and Rob Williams there, it very much sounded like they are pushing for a sort of general strike. They're pushing for these socialist policies of the 70s. Do you think it's just a coincidence that all of these people are feeling the pinch of the cost of living crisis at the moment and are choosing to go on strike? Or is it a real push for a very different kind of politics that we're seeing right now?
Look, everyone is feeling the pinch of the cost of living crisis. People in the private sector, people in the public sector. I certainly haven't had an inflation-busting pay rise. Look, obviously all of the unions say that they're not working in hock with each other, but when you hear two prominent people in the union movement calling for a general strike, it kind of does suggest that perhaps behind closed doors they are working together.
I suppose there's always that distinction that we need to draw between sort of the union leaders and the more political people at the top of the trade union movement and the workers who might not be sort of, ascribed to the Communist Manifesto or followers of Mr. Marx or otherwise. I think perhaps when we talk to the leaders of these movements, they might have different aims from the people that they're purporting to represent.
Yes, of course. I mean, the leaders of organisations, movements, whether or not that's a trade union, whether or not that's the Conservative Party, will sometimes have very different goals to the actual membership. But what is important is that we actually do focus on the membership, what people want, and the services that they provide to people up and down the country. And I think we're going to be talking about hospitality later on. You know, the economy, especially the hospitality industry, is being clobbered by this strike action just at the time when we're having the first normal Christmas since the end of COVID.
Well, thank you very much, Albie, and we'll be back to you very shortly.
We will indeed. Well, coming up on Today, the much-anticipated Boxing Day sales are now on. Thousands of shoppers are expected to take to the high streets to benefit from the big discounts on offer.
But experts warn that retailers could face a tricky year because of the cost of living crisis. We're back after a short break.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, happy Boxing Day. It's just coming up to 10:25 and you're with me, Tom Harwood, and Olivia Utley here on GB News. We're in today for Bev Turner.
December is the biggest month of the year for most UK retailers, but data from the ONS Retail Sales Index shows November makes up 1/5 of this year's sales.
So if you've received money as a Christmas gift or maybe even some gift vouchers, you'd expect to bag some Boxing Day bargains now that the sales are on.
But this year is different. The value of goods purchased during the Boxing Day sales is predicted to be nearly 10% lower than last year.
Well, our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley is live in the High Street in Leeds for us. Anna, is it living up to predictions? What's the street like right now this morning on Boxing Day?
Good morning. Yes, it is, certainly the people here that are out shopping, but it's not as busy as it has been expected to be last year. There are major shops that are closed that you would normally expect to see people queuing outside of, like Next. We know that that's traditionally open from sort of 6 in the morning with people even camping out at one point, but they've decided to close today and open up tomorrow. And the same's happened with Marks and Spencer's and John Lewis as well. So we're not seeing as much footfall, but people are still out here trying to get the bargains. They not all shopping online, but that's what the British Retail Consortium have said, that a lot more people now shopping online rather than in the stores. But when I've been speaking to shoppers today, they've said that they still do like to go out into the stores, look and feel the items to get what they're buying, and they've said that they've actually seen better deals in the stores than online. And there's a lot of people that have been out as well exchanging items. They might not necessarily had the right clothes size, so they're out swapping items and getting some bargains at the same time. But certainly the cost of living is impacting on the amount of people that are coming out on the street, with people struggling to afford luxury items. So throughout the day we'll keep you updated with the amount of people on the street, but it certainly does feel a lot more subdued, and you've not got that influx of customers that you expected to normally see on Boxing Day.
Thank you very much, Anna, that's great.
Well, let's move this on now, bringing the political commentator Albi Amancorner, who's here with us, of course, throughout the show. I suppose it is odd. We've had multiple Christmases now where people haven't been able to go to the shops, where the high streets has taken an absolute beating. But perhaps I was naive in thinking that this year would have been a bit better for the shops.
Well, it comes back to our earlier discussion about strikes. If people can't get to the shops, they can't spend their money in the shops. And actually, another thing that we've seen, of course, was on Black Friday and Cyber Monday. We also saw pretty disappointing results for the retailers then as well. So this is a really tough time for retailers. We see a lot of retail businesses making the bulk of their money really during this Q4 season. So I'll be very interested to see in April, when it's earnings season, to see how a lot of these major retailers have been reporting. Probably not very good results.
It often feels as though the high street is just in a permanent existential crisis, which is getting worse and worse. And it feels, definitely, I've heard this from a lot of people who run shops, that the government doesn't seem to be doing much about it. Is there a sort of silver bullet solution? Would scrapping business rates altogether or something be a move that Rishi Sunak could make in the new year to change the trajectory of this?
I think if Rishi Sunak was going to scrap business rates, it might have been something which we would have already have seen. Of course, it was something which I think Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves called for earlier on in the year. And of course, one of the big problems at the moment is actually how is the government going to fund public services, and scrapping business rates is obviously quite a big revenue generator for the Exchequer. But looking at business rates, certainly, which is something which hinders small businesses up and down the country, is probably something which would be wise from a government looking to reignite the high street.
There was some sort of tinkering with business rates with regard to how warehouses were taxed compared to high street shops. I'm not quite sure the detail of it, but I think warehouses are going to be taxed ever so slightly more highly than high street shops, just in order to make up for online sales and all the rest of it. But it does strike me that this is a a Conservative government that whenever it can will seek to raise taxes rather than cut them to try and equalise things.
Although, I suppose, I mean, you could argue that why should the government be propping up physical stores if things are moving online? That's the way the force of the markets works. Do you think there is a good argument for saving the high street?
Yes, I think there is absolutely a good argument for saving the high street. If we talk to a lot of people in these left-behind towns that Boris Johnson, of course, turned blue at the 2019 general election, what they want are their high streets reinvigorated. These are places of community where people come together. It gives people pride of place. Of course, there is a Conservative argument to save the high street, because a lot of these small businesses are the backbone of the British economy.
And yet I suppose we're not going to see any particularly good results for businesses while we are in recession. And all the independent forecasters are saying that is in the middle of what we are at right now. We've had one quarter of negative growth, just been revised down to minus 0.3. We're expecting the next quarter to be negative as well. I suppose, is there any room for hope in this pretty dark economic time?
Look, we should always remain hopeful, and I'm certainly hopeful that the government will get a hold of things and deliver better results for businesses and individuals next year. I think another thing which is really hindering business at the moment is, of course, the labour shortage. You know, there's a cafe just around the corner from my house which closes every Monday because they simply can't get the staff, which is in stark contrast to the government's kind of anti-immigration message. It's not necessarily the pro-growth agenda that we need for Britain to reinvigorate the high street and reinvigorate the economy.
Really interesting point there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll be back to you very soon.
Well, after the break, sit back, relax and plan your Christmas TV viewing with the help of top tips from showbiz guru Ellie Phillips. That's after your morning news.
Good morning, it's 10:31. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. Jersey police have confirmed a woman who was injured in an explosion at a block of flats in Jersey earlier this month has died in hospital on Christmas Day. Jersey police confirmed Kathleen McGuinness's death. The blast, which took place just after 4 a.m. on the 10th of December, destroyed the building in St Helier. Her death now brings the total number of people killed in the incident to 10. The inquests into their deaths will open on this Friday before being adjourned while the investigation into the incident continues. At least 30 people are believed to have died as a result of a severe Arctic freeze that continues to grip much of the US and Canada. Officials say the worst hit area is the city of Buffalo in New York State. Amid the snow, ice and freezing temperatures, thousands of flights have been cancelled and more than 150,000 homes are still without power. Russia's defence ministry claimed 3 of its military personnel have been killed at an airbase hundreds of miles from the front line of its war with Ukraine. Moscow alleged they were hit by falling debris from a Ukrainian drone that it says was shot down. Kiev has not yet commented on the incident. The UK's rail network are effectively shut today as members of the RMT union hold a fresh round of strike action in a dispute over pay. Hundreds of trains usually run on Boxing Day, but they've all been cancelled and thousands of people have been forced to make alternative plans. The AA expects 15.2 million cars on UK roads today, and Eurostar has also dropped all of its services, which run to London, Paris, Brussels and Amsterdam as a result of the RMT action. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Tom and Olivia will be back in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's just gone 10:36 on Boxing Day morning, and you're watching GB News with Tom Harwood and Olivia Utley in for Bev Turner.
Well, lots of you this week. It's all about putting up your feet and turning on the festive telly. But there are still lots of treats to entertain us this Boxing Day.
Here to give some top tips for your post-Christmas viewing is showbiz journalist Ellie Phillips. So, Ellie, what should we be watching over the next few days?
There is so much TV on, it's really difficult to kind of pick and choose from everything. So what I've done is I've done a top one or two for each day. Today, this afternoon, this evening, 8 o'clock, BBC One, is the Repair Shop Christmas Special. If you've not seen the Repair Shop, Jay Blades and co take items that are sentimental to people and they repair them. It sounds a bit like, why would I want to watch that? But it's the backstories. So it's why that object is so important to that person. It's a massive tearjerker. And today they are going to repair a battered trombone, an elderly tree, which is a bit of a random one, and they're going to amend a projector. So you can imagine the stories from people's youth, you know, that they take in. If I were to ever go on it, I would take a chessboard that my dad taught me to play chess on.
Oh.
Some of the pieces, I mean, it's a nice one. It's not, you know, anything fancy, but some of the pieces are a bit chipped and stuff, and we could buy a new one, but it doesn't have that meaning. So I would definitely take that. What would you guys take in if you were going to go on the Repair Shop?
Olivia, do you want to start?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, I used to have a very nice cassette player, which I spent all my childhood basically listening to Harry Potter cassettes on. And it finally broke, and I had to jam a whisk head down the play button to make it work. And I kept it for so many years, and I still think it's hiding somewhere. But I would love to listen to a cassette on that.
I remember the days when you used to stop and start trying to record things on the radio. Yeah.
And when the radio came on, and you knew that there was going to be like a little blip while the like signals went crazy. God, so 90s.
And those early Harry Potter cassette tapes as well. It was like Stephen Fry was a third parent to me. It was like really. I was thinking about what mine would be.
What would yours be?
And I was having a lot of trouble trying to think of something vaguely sentimental. And then I realised I was back home with my parents yesterday, and I saw that they'd put something out in the garden that used to live in a shed. And this is a life-size Dalek that I built with my dad when I was a lot younger. And it's sitting out in the garden. Obviously, there's no room for it indoor. And why would you keep a life-size part papier-mâché, part fiberglass Dalek? But so it's sitting out there getting getting a little bit rained on, getting a little bit deteriorated, which is kind of nice in its own way, but perhaps that needs to be brought back to its old days.
Fiberglass, this sounds quite
It was a project that took a year.
Yeah.
Every Sunday, me and my dad would be working on it. First papier-mâché, then got some fiberglass and made it a real project. I would sit in it. You had sort of, the plunger and the thing that you could move around.
Amazing.
There were flashing lights on the top. Do you know what? I might have to find a picture to see if we can get it up on the screen a bit later in the show.
Well, how about you, Aidan?
I would have to be my apartment after last night. I hosted my entire family around in the evening, and they promised they'd go for 9:30. In fact, on my Christmas menu, I had a disclaimer at the bottom saying they wanted to vacate by 21:30. They left at midnight.
Of course.
I stayed there welcomed by 3 hours, and they completely trashed my apartment. They say they're going to go around this afternoon and help me tidy it up. I don't believe that for a second. I don't think I've seen
Well, once you get home, once you get sorted, you can chill out tonight, because one of the things that's on Channel 4 at 9 p.m. tonight is the big fat quiz of the year. And I love these. I love at the end of the year when we look back and make fun of everything that's happened. As awful as it might have been, I think the British thing is that we just have to, take it with a pinch of salt, laugh as much as we can and make fun of it. So tonight, that's Jimmy Carr hosting, and he's got a really good lineup. He's got Stephen Merchant, Catherine Ryan, Maisie Adam, Jonathan Ross and Rose Matafeo. If you don't know who she is, she's in something called Starstruck, which is a series that is a really good watch. Not a Christmas watch, but a really good watch. And then tomorrow, kind of steering away from Christmas a bit, but something that really is good you want to see is the film 1917.
Oh, God, I sobbed my way through that film.
It's so good, right? OK, so this stars George McKay, Dean Charles Chapman and Colin Firth. It's Sam Mendes' Oscar-winning World War I film, two soldiers attempting to deliver a message to the front line.
It's really remarkable. It's all filmed in one long shot, no camera cuts at all, apart from one bit where they cheat because he goes to sleep, and so it's sort of the cutaway. But
it works.
It does work. You don't think it would be so compelling, but it really is.
Yeah, so that's a first for TV, because you've only ever seen that elsewhere before. And then we're getting to Wednesday now, so this is when everyone's like, what day of the week is it? Where am I up to? This is the 28th of December, Wednesday, and I've got two picks. So I've got an afternoon, if you want to snooze in and out, Finding Dory. So this is the sequel, obviously, to Finding Nemo, voiced by Ellen DeGeneres. Easy watch. No one can argue about this one. It's family friendly, so that's really good. And then in the evening, again, not Christmassy, but one I am desperate to see. It's on at 9 o'clock on BBC One. It's called Mayflies. It stars Martin Compson, who gets my massive tick straight away, and it's a two-part adaptation of Andrew O'Hagan's novel of the same name, Mayflies. So it's two parts. So Wednesday, 28th, we're going to see part one at 9 o'clock, and then the next night, part two will be on. So that's quite good, because it's easy, and it's a BBC one, and they're quite good at these short...
What's the sort of gist of it?
So it's a tearjerker. So
too many
friends
tearjerkers
get back in touch when one has been diagnosed with cancer. But it's meant to be absolutely brilliant. The novel has been brilliant, really well written, and so, this is an adaptation of that. So I think that one... I know it's not Christmassy, but I think Martin Compson, brilliant actor. Everything he's in, Line of Duty, amazing. So I think that's one.
And just finally, anything lighter for us?
One that you've got to absolutely love. Waiting for this one's Thursday, when you haven't got a clue what's going on in the world. Thursday, the 29th of December, on Channel 4 at 9 p.m, is Prince Andrew the Musical, which I cannot wait for. Honestly, I've seen clips of it, and it looks brilliant. So you know this famous interview that he did, obviously? So there's a scene of that, and obviously it's a musical, and the song that he sings post-interview is said, I nailed it. That's the title, I nailed it. And he sings about how he nailed it, and he's dancing around in the set.
I have been pelted by adverts for this on my Instagram, and I have to say, I mean, the concept is great. The actors look nothing like the people they're trying to portray.
Not at all, but they are brilliant actors. The cast is amazing. You've got Kieran Hodgson, who is an incredible actor and comedian. You've also got Jenny Bede, Harry Enfield's in it, and Bag of Chips, if anyone watches Drag Race UK. So the cast is brilliant. It's a massive musical parody.
How on earth have they managed to get Bag of Chips in that story? I mean,
that's what everyone's like, you've got to see this, you've got to see what happens. And I'm really hoping, from what I've seen, it's going to be this kind of Book of Mormon style take on it.
Yeah, just so silly.
So silly, but like really well executed. And I think that was
the trailers are fun.
Well, Ellie Phillips, thank you so much for that rip-roaring look through everything that we can expect on our festive telly season. Apart from, of course, GB News, which will be on 24/7 through the festive period.
Boxing Day is always a big day for football. There are both Premier League and Championship football throughout the day. And obviously we've been 5 weeks off the Premier League for the World Cup, and I think we've all kind of forgotten where we were at. So can you talk us through?
Yeah, well, Arsenal 5 points ahead at the top of the table. They've not won the league since 2004. It would be enormous, given the financial strength of Manchester City, even Manchester United, and certainly the prowess that Liverpool have shown in recent years for Arsenal to go and win that. So they're playing tonight against West Ham at 8 o'clock.
Were you up too late at your Christmas party last night?
Did I mention that? So, 2.5 hours sleep, actually. No, but listen, they could go 8 points clear tonight. Now, the issue here is that Boxing Day is always a big day for football, but we're effectively starting the season again. What we get at the start of a season is freak results. Where are the players at mentally? Where are they in terms of their match fitness? Where are they in terms of their physical fitness? Where are they in terms of... Sometimes you get the Argentine players, for example, who've just won the World Cup. Are they going to come back and fancy a trip to Brentford?
And this is so soon after the World Cup, for the first time.
We had to, because we never had a World Cup in, as you mentioned there, in the middle of a season. We were determined that it didn't disrupt the schedule too much, so we've just got to be up. You know, some of the Championship matches just in the division below, where my own team QPR are, they started 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
So not mucking around. They've got 46 games in that roster. That's not including cup games. And there are going to be questions around players' fitness in terms of look in January, look in February, where we get the inclement weather, we get postponements, we get rearranged fixtures. It's going to be a nightmare, and it's going to be a huge battle of endurance for who wins the title now. But as for whether Arsenal can hang on, they've lost their striker, Gabriel Jesus, at the World Cup, so they've got that to deal with. So, as I say, though, they beat West Ham tonight, who are out of form. Although saying that, out of form doesn't matter, because no one's played for 5 weeks. So what's form? What's form when you haven't played for 5 weeks? You probably had a rest, you've got players back from injury. Who knows which way it's going to go, but it's going to be very exciting nonetheless.
Yeah, and you talk about player mentality. I mean, I suppose all eyes are going to be on Harry Kane.
Without doubt. I mean, it's 2 weeks ago since he blazed that penalty over the bar while we were all watching at the GB News Christmas party.
We were.
The good thing about the GB News Christmas party, there aren't too many football enthusiasts there, so the party just carried on as normal, which was great. So, yeah, look, his manager, Antonio Conte, played with a guy called Roberto Baggio back in 1994. He famously blazed a penalty over the bar in a World Cup final to lose Italy the league. Now, Conte referenced this. He's a teammate of Baggio's in that game about 29 years ago, and he said Baggio spoke to him and said he could actually feel part of himself dying inside when he realised that the ball had gone over the bar and it was going to impact the whole nation. Now, Harry Redknapp on going back to 1994 again. Harry Kane hit the ball over the bar. Antonio Conte said, "Look, I know both men. Harry Kane is a different animal. He's somebody who will be able to park it and get back into the league, and I think that he will as well. He's normally very reliable from those penalties. That was an aberration. Yes, it was costly, but let's face it, football is not life or death."
No, well, let's park football for a second, because it's also a big racing day today,
Yes,
of course.
it is, a huge racing day. I mean, again, Boxing Day, one of the biggest days of the year. I've counted 11 races, all the major meetings, Fontwell, Leopardstown, Market Raise and Wincanton, all the ones we've heard of. Kempton Park, a big one as well. Now, my job in one of my previous jobs was to go and inspect the pitch on Boxing Day and on Christmas Day sometimes. I'd have to get up at about 4 in the morning, just as my previous night's party was winding up, get down to the racecourse, get a big pitchfork, put my foot into the ground and see what the ground felt like. The groundsman would get a thermometer type device to see what the temperature would be like. He'd be able to predict the weather for later in the day, where the race goers would have to bring an umbrella, that kind of stuff. I do have a tip. Vanessa Williams on Long Press at the King George at Kempton Park. I think that's around about 3 o'clock, but get on it if you can. Not literally on the horse. If we can encourage gambling, without a fluster.
If you fancy that. And finally, some sad news as well.
Yeah, some very sad news, actually. We've had, it's been in the offing for a little while. I mean, the family of Pelé, the former Brazilian striker, considered by many to be the very best of all time. He's 82 years old. He's been battling cancer since going to hospital. Well, he's been battling cancer for a couple of years, actually, but he was admitted to hospital in Sao Paulo on November the 29th. His daughter, his granddaughter, Kelly Nascimento, has said that the end of life is nigh. Oh. So we await announcements on that later today, possibly even tomorrow. We'll be right across it, of course, for you here on GB News.
Well, that's very sad. I suppose we shouldn't really end on something very, very sad. No. Your Christmas party last night, why did it go on so long?
It went on so long because my family don't know when to take a hint. I said, we got to the Christmas special of EastEnders, 9:30. I said, right, you can stay for that, it's an hour. Then we had all the drama with Mick Carter, we had a debate after that. Then
I think we've got some pictures of you here.
Yeah, sorry, so that's the ham and cheese croquettes. So that's my niece's partner there, taking 2 when he was only really meant to take 1. That's my brother there. He's nonplussed by the whole thing. Then I come around there. There's my picture up on the wall. My nephew there, James, he's asking me where I got my apron from. I was
amazing.
And then we moved over towards my sister-in-law, who's off camera, as are my two nieces. Plenty of ham and cheese chocolates left there, but
not surprised they weren't taking a hint.
They're going like
wonderful,
hotcakes.
Chris.
There you
Well,
go.
fantastic.
Dog down there as well.
Fantastic hosting ability.
Oh, that's
there.
my chestnut soup. That was the first course. Now, if you want to get those five-star reviews, you've got to these days include the Wi-Fi passcode on the table.
Very
Not
important.
that big knife, that's just the cocktail station. And we started the night
quality
with,
streets.
and crisps as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Fantastic. We had that in my household as well, but also. At my house, we had sort of as the evening went on, we started, playing with the gifts that we'd all sort of given each other, and my sister got the most it was a really well-meaning gift for her boyfriend. I think we've got a picture of it coming up here. It's a jigsaw puzzle made of a picture, a sentimental picture, right? Lovely. The problem with this picture is it's about 50% blue sky, entirely identical pieces of blue sky. Do you know how many hours we were trying to put these? I think we've got some more pictures that we can go through here, because miraculously we did bit by bit these identical blue jigsaw pieces.
Is that status in now?
Every single one. No. By now, by yesterday evening, also this went on a bit too long, and perhaps we were a bit longer because there was alcohol involved. But we ended up, and I think we've got one more picture that may well be able to come up onto our screen.
Oh, we've got to see the final result.
Can we? Oh, no, we don't have it. Do you know what? What a reason. What a reason to stick with us here on GB News, because you will be able to find out, did myself, my mother and my sister's boyfriend actually, were we able to finish that puzzle? Well, stick with us here on GB News and we'll find out. For now, Aidan McGivern and Ellie Phillips, thank you so much for joining us for this really fun and spirited segment.
Now, for many, fox hunting is as much a part of Boxing Day as leftover turkey and discarded gifts. And the 2005 hunting ban has done little to dampen huntsmen's enthusiasm.
Now, by law, the hunt must now use dragtails instead of hunting foxes, but new figures released today reveal many are seemingly flouting the law, and little is being done to stop them. Well, our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody has been talking to people on both sides of this debate.
The traditional Boxing Day meet, horses, hounds, and the thrill of the chase.
We've had to change what we do after the Hunting Act came in. It isn't exactly the same, but it's as close as we can make it. We lay our lines, we chase those lines. I mean, there are clearly people who don't want us to do what we're doing, and given that we are hunting within the law, there can only be one conclusion, and that is that this isn't an issue of hunting for them.
But the League Against Cruel Sports says many hunts haven't adapted. They're doing exactly what they used to. They've compiled 300 reports of suspected illegal hunting.
The Hunting Act is there, but with witnesses seeing foxes still being chased, in some instances still being killed, both of which are illegal under the Hunting Act, but exemptions in the law making it terribly difficult to actually bring a prosecution, certainly a successful one.
Concerns too about public safety. Pip Donovan is from Action Against Fox Hunting. She's been campaigning alongside other groups, Grantham Against Blood Sports and Protect the Wild, to stop their local hunt in Somerset from gathering in town on safety grounds. They say the hunt in Chard hasn't properly applied for a road closure.
The Somerset County Council said to us, oh, well, it's too late to do anything. Too late to do anything to get the roads closed properly, bearing in mind that road closure is about public safety. It's not about being bloody-minded about the hunts. It's about public safety. It's about making sure that the public are not put at risk.
Somerset Council have admitted they made mistakes. They told GB News, "We can confirm that the council is not using any powers to close roads for hunt meets this year. We have spoken to the hunts identified by Action Against Fox Hunting, and 2 have confirmed they will meet on private land, and the 3rd will not be closing the road. We apologise for any misunderstandings in relation to this matter." Action Against Fox Hunting have drawn blood. It's now a battle of wills, with both sides hunting for loopholes.
It's the spirit of the law we want to see being adhered to. So we want changes made to ensure that proper spirit, that let's protect British wildlife, is actually in force. And that's what we'll be calling on whichever government is in after the next general election to do for us.
If opinion polls are to be believed, the party that introduced the ban could be picking up the scent in a year or two.
Look at all this. This tells you the real truth of the matter. Hunting is very much part of England, old England and modern England, and we're here to stay.
Here now, but for how much longer? Jeff Moody, GB News.
And thanks to Jeff for that. That's the end of our first hour. We'll be right back with yet another hour of excellent content here on Boxing Day after the weather.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking sunny and blustery with showers, often wintry in the north. Let's take a look at the details. A mixture of sunshine and showers across the southwest of England. These showers blustery and heavy at times, feeling a little colder than recent days with temperatures closer to average. Across southeast, it's dry and bright with plenty of prolonged sunshine while breezy on the coast. Blustery showers will move eastwards across Wales, these occasionally turning wintry over high ground with brighter spells at times. A generally dry day for most across the Midlands with plenty of prolonged sunshine. Some scattered blustery showers may affect western and northern areas for a time. Staying dry for most across northeast England with plenty of sunshine, although at risk of a few wintry showers over high ground. Temperatures struggling to reach above 4 or 5 Celsius. Wintry showers will continue to move eastwards across most of Scotland, with snow falling over any high ground. Breezy, particularly on the coast. Northern Ireland will see a day of sunshine and showers, these turning wintry over high ground at times. Breezy and feeling colder than recent days. Showers will continue to affect western areas, these often wintry in the north, spreading east later. And that is how your weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness,
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good Boxing Day morning to you. You're with me, Tom Harwood, and Olivia Utley here, standing in for Bev Turner on GB News. Before midday, we're going to get to the bottom of the strikes taking hold of this country.
Britons face travel chaos this Boxing Day as railway strike workers go on strike amid a dispute over pay.
And later on in the programme, we'll be joined by the presenter of How Clean Is Your House, Aggie McKenzie, who will give us her top tips on how to organise your house post-Christmas celebrations.
And we'll be discussing all this with our studio guest, political commentator Albi Amankono. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
Thanks, Tom and Olivia. A very good morning to you. It's just gone 11 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. Jersey police have confirmed a woman who was injured in an explosion at a block of flats in Jersey earlier this month has died in hospital on Christmas Day. Kathleen McGuinness's death brings the total number of people killed in the incident to 10. The blast, which took place just after 4 a.m. on the 10th of December, destroyed the building in St Helier. An inquest into the deaths will open this Friday before being adjourned while the investigation into the incident continues. At least 30 people are believed to have died as a result of a severe Arctic freeze that continues to grip much of the US and Canada. Officials say the worst hit area is the city of Buffalo in New York State. Amid the snow, ice and freezing temperatures, thousands of flights have been cancelled and more than 150,000 homes are still without power. Russia's defence ministry claimed 3 of its military personnel have been killed at an airbase hundreds of miles from the front line of its war with Ukraine. Moscow alleged they were hit by falling debris from a Ukrainian drone that it says was shot down. The governor says no aircraft was damaged at the airfield in Russia's southeast. It's the second attack on the military site this month. It's understood it stores long-range strategic bombers. Kiev has not yet commented on the incident. The final 2 skiers who were missing after an avalanche in a skiing area in Western Austria have now been found. Local reports say the avalanche happened yesterday afternoon and it was initially thought that 10 people had been buried under the snow. Helicopters, searchlights and avalanche dogs were used in the operation to locate the missing people. The UK's rail networks are effectively shut down today as members of the RMT union hold a fresh round of strike action in a dispute over pay. Hundreds of trains usually run on Boxing Day, but they've all been cancelled and thousands of people have been forced to make alternative plans. The AA expects 15.2 million cars on UK roads today. Eurostar has also dropped all of its services, which run to London, Paris, Brussels and Amsterdam as a result of the action. Travel expert Simon Calder said the strikes are destroying the railways.
1 million people like me who don't have a car or access to a car who have to travel by rail. And to be told, oh, come back middle of January isn't good enough. The rail unions, I think, have completely misjudged it. The government has completely misjudged it. The passenger and the taxpayer are caught up in this middle of this kind of ideological row. And it's absolutely, all it's doing is destroying the railways.
Police say a shooting at a pub in Liverpool on Christmas Eve in which 1 woman was killed was not a targeted attack. The search is continuing for the gunman who killed the 26-year-old woman in Wallasey on Merseyside. She was taken to hospital but later died. 4 men were also taken to hospital with gunshot injuries. The UK Health Security Agency will stop publishing COVID-19 data early next month. The chief data scientist says it's no longer necessary, as the country is now living with the disease, but that COVID will still be monitored. Data had been published weekly during the peak of the pandemic and every 2 weeks since April this year. And shoppers are expected to spend less in the sales today as the cost of living continues to rise. New research by Barclaycard Payments found the average customer intends to buy around £229 worth of items in the post-Christmas sales. That's 4% less compared to last year. The study also found that a number of shoppers expect to turn to reselling sites to buy items or to offload unwanted gifts. You're up to date. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Tom and Olivia.
Good morning and welcome. You're with Olivia Utley and Tom Harwood, standing in for Bev Turner on GB News. Today we're talking strikes. Thousands of commuters are facing Boxing Day chaos today as rail workers strike over a pay dispute. We'll be joined by a former member of the RMT union.
And the presenter of How Clean Is Your House, Aggie McKenzie, will be giving us her top tips on how to organise your house after the festive period.
And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Email us on gbviews@gbnews or tweet us at gbnews to have your say.
Now, leading the day today, it's not leftovers from Christmas lunch, but it's thousands of commuters facing travel disruption after the Network Rail workers continued their strike over pay and working conditions.
Network Rail said Britain's railways will remain closed for a second consecutive day. Members of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union remain on strike until 6 a.m. on December the 27th.
So let's cross live to our GB News national reporter, Theo Chikomba, who's at Birmingham New Street Station. Theo, what's it like there? Pretty empty, I'm expecting.
Yeah, it's pretty empty. No one can go in or out of the station unless you work for Network Rail, and it's going to be like this all day until tomorrow, in the third day of RMT union strikes. Now, this is over pay and conditions. We have met a lot of them over the picket line over the last few weeks. A lot of them saying simply the conditions that are in place at the moment simply aren't good enough for them, but also for the safety of the passengers who use the railway. 15.2 million people are expected to be on the roads today as they make alternative travel arrangements today. And if you are thinking of getting a train, they are advising you to think about a slightly different way for you to travel. Today, of course, is Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, and people will be going into their shopping centres. Normally, there are several trains running on Boxing Day, but this year it's a complete standstill. And just in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be seeing ASLEF union members take to the picket line as well, train drivers across the country. So there'll be more disruption as the weeks come in the next couple of weeks.
Well, Theo, thank you for bringing us that, even though it's not particularly happy news. Well, happy Boxing Day anyway. We'll be catching up with you later in the day, no doubt.
And to delve further into this, we're now joined by rail expert at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Len Shackleton. Len, good morning, Len. So, of course, there are those who are saying now that the government should just give in and accept these rail demands. We know that inflation is set to go down next year. Is it really worth the government expending what, let's be honest, is not very much political capital it has left on keeping this fight going?
I think it probably is from their point of view, because, I mean, once you give in to one of these rather inflated demands, you know, where do you draw the line? You've got a huge number of public sector workers and quasi-public sector workers, like railway workers, who are putting in these claims. And the cost to the taxpayer and to nobody else, it's not a cost to the government, of course, it's a cost to the taxpayer, will run into many billions, which could be put to better use, I would argue.
Now, earlier on the programme, we spoke to Steve Headley, formerly of the executive of the RMT himself, and he was saying that the government could find billions upon billions of pounds during COVID to give to the private rail companies. He said not very much of that flowed down to the workers of the rail companies. I'm not sure how true that is, but he was saying that billions got given to these companies during COVID. Why can't billions be given to the workers now? Is he right?
Well, billions, of course, were given to the workers during COVID. In the public sector and on the railways, nobody was furloughed, nobody lost their job. They had a much better time than people in the genuine private sector. They talk about the rail companies. This is a red herring. At the moment, the rail companies are a busted flush. Several have been taken over by the operator of last resort. That's a completely different kind of question to ask. Yeah, you can always find money under, the back of the sofa. The government finds every now and again, but you just can't keep doing this. And in the case of the railways, I would argue it would be wrong to do this because what the railways are doing, what the railway workers are doing is trying not only to put in a massive wage claim, but also to defend working practices which haven't changed fundamentally in 50 years. And they really need to change in a rail system which is shrinking by the day in terms of its public.
I mean, this obviously can't go on forever, though, and yes, the government can make the points that you've just made, but at some point there's going to have to be some movement. What in the long term is the solution to this crisis?
The solution to this crisis, I think, is for the unions to sit down with the government and negotiate productivity changes which could fund genuine wage increases. Not just draw on the bottomless pit of made-up money from the Treasury, which eventually we'll have to pay back in one form or another, and in the short run will just boost higher inflation. So I think you cannot really begin these serious talks with the rail unions unless you've got productivity issues on the table. It's not just about money, despite what the rail unions will try to tell you.
How easy are those productivity reforms? Is there any sort of low-hanging fruit there that could really spur the way that our rail services run, that could increase the efficiency of our rail services?
There are relatively few low-hanging fruit, but it is reasonable to pay unions off for things which will return genuine productivity increases in the future. And there have been identified areas in maintenance, for example, the mechanisation, the use of drones in maintenance, this whole business of driver-operated trains, which is a nonsense. I've travelled into Fenchurch Street year after year on trains which were driven just by the driver, the doors open by the driver, no guards on board, perfectly safe, very successful railway, but other parts of the network are just operated on this business. They employ a guy or a woman who just presses the button to open the doors, and that's the limit of their job, basically. They don't do very much else. So, yeah, there are productivity gains which could be made in the short run, and it's fair enough, the government will have to pay for these productivity gains, but to suggest that they're not on the table at all and that we just have to whack out yet more money, as we have done year after year, for generations, in fact. And these issues were on the table 50 years ago.
Well, thank you very much, Len, for speaking to us today.
Let's continue this conversation now. Thanks, Len. Cheers. Let's continue this conversation now with political commentator Sam Dowler. Sam, thanks for joining us. I suppose it's a really tricky situation here. We were listening to Len Shackleton there saying if we move to driver-only operation like they have in many European countries, that could, of course, fund big wage rises. But, of course, that would, I suppose, mean job losses, fewer people running the trains, even though it would be more efficient and perhaps lead to a more cheap service to run and higher wages or whatever. There's an economic case to be made there, but I suppose it's a harder political one to make.
Well, of course, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on the DLR, which are driverless completely. I mean, how long before, the rail network is completely automated, because obviously they're closing tickets, booths, like all the time. So this is, but like your guest just said, this has been going on for over 50 years. So I don't understand, like, I mean, every time there's a rail strike, we hear about the same issues again. So tell me why each consecutive government for the last 50 years hasn't been able to get to the bottom of this and somehow sort these problems out, because they're not going anywhere. And once again, here we are on Boxing Day, hardly any trains. I mean, I'm here in Devon, but I wanted to get the train, but I drove down because I have to be back in London. And I just wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to make it or not. It's affecting, obviously, Boxing Day sales. It's affecting the economy, and and along with the cornucopia of other strikes. I mean, what the hell's going on right now?
Yeah, is there a bit of a problem? You mentioned that you had to drive down to Devon. Do you think there's a bit of a problem for the unions down the line, that people will just stop relying on trains? We know that people aren't commuting as much as they were anymore. People are predominantly using the train for leisure purposes. And is there a point where people think, well, my travel card for the month isn't getting me enough trains, I'm just going to stop using them? Could we be looking at the beginning of the end, maybe even, of the railway industry as we know it?
Well, no, I don't. Well, this is the thing. I mean, there are two reasons why I wanted to drive down. First of all, like, even with the price of petrol, it was cheaper for me on my own in a car to drive down and to drive back again. That's like, it took me 5 hours to get down here, and it'll be 5 hours to get back tomorrow. But again, it was like, I mean, my train ticket was over £100, and also like, I wasn't to know whether they were going to run or not. However, one thing I will say, especially to the viewers, is that check your local train company, because I mean, there's all this talk about there's no trains running at all. Whereas sometimes there are. Sometimes it's a skeleton service, and there's one per hour, etc. So don't just like give up because you've heard it on the news. Yeah. Definitely go and check what's going on. But again, like as we're saying with cost of living crisis, like, I mean, surely getting a train is supposed to be cheaper than driving. When I mean, literally, I'm just case in point where it is not at all.
It feeds into this sort of sense, this general malaise, and this sense that nothing's working in this country, that it would almost be better for no trains to be running at all than have the hope of buy a ticket and then it just doesn't turn up. GBNews commissioned polling last week that suggested more than half, or at least the plurality of people in this country, no longer agree that things work in this country. I wonder if this is a time for the government to get more radical. They've proposed what are called a minimum service level requirement legislation in order to enforce, really, a minimum service on the railways. Do you expect that could be popular?
I think, obviously, you speak to the person on the street and they see, this grim outlook. They see cost of living crisis. They see all these strikes, and of course they would think, oh, Britain's broken, Britain's not working. But I think there is some sort of there's politics in there as well. There's obviously the Tories, their reputation is in the doldrums at the moment. So I mean, who's to say that the unions aren't sticking the knife in right at the right time to make them look even worse than they are? But at the same time, it's a perfect storm of disasters all over the country, and so where can we turn? We can't get a train. We can't we can't get any birthday cards. We can't can we even expect an ambulance if Granny falls down the stairs? What is going on, literally?
Is there an argument for the government, actually, although it doesn't have that much political popularity to expend, is there an argument for it getting really tough on the unions? Is there an argument that the incentives for the unions are actually to keep our rail services ineffective, to keep those, as you say, or as Len said earlier, people on the trains who just press one button? Is there an argument that Rishi Sunak should go in there and do a sort of Margaret Thatcher on the unions, or do they just not have that sort of political power at the moment?
I think, I think we all know that the Tories are quite politically weak at the moment. If they were going to do that with the railways, are they going to do that with the nurses? Are they going to do that with the ambulances? They don't have the clout to do it for everybody, so they can't really pick and choose which battle they're going to fight. I mean, obviously, like I said, there's a 50-year problem with the railways, and it's something that isn't going to go away. And I think a lot of British people don't really understand what the problems are, because they hear things like, somebody getting paid 60 grand to press a button like every now and again. They're like, well, that's ridiculous, etc. But because we don't know the ins and outs, it's complicated. It's not just like with the nurses, we want more money. It's to do with the whole infrastructure itself. So I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on this. I mean, how is everyday people going to understand what they're really fighting for?
Really, really tricky decisions for the government to make. Perhaps they will be more bold in the new year. But for now, Sam Dowler, thanks for joining us and talking through that. Let's broaden this conversation out now with the political commentator Albie Amankona, who's with us for the whole programme. And Albie, I suppose there is a big choice for Rishi Sunak here. Does he want to be Mr. Furlough, like he was in the pandemic, try and be Mr. Nice and give free money to all the people and damn the consequences later on, as there are clearly consequences later on? Or does he want to be more Thatcherite and actually have some battles?
I think Rishi Sunak does need to be more firm, especially with the strikers. I think part of the problem comes from how generous the government was during the COVID pandemic, because it created this attitude within the British public that money can always be found to solve a problem. An extra billion here, an extra billion there, it doesn't really matter. So we fast forward 2 years from furlough and we have the nurses asking for extra money, we have other public sector workers asking for extra money, and the public think, oh, it's fine, we can just give them this extra money, there's not going to be any consequences. But of course now, we saw what happened with Liz Truss, we can't borrow anymore without the financial markets going a bit berserk. So the government has to be more firm because we simply cannot afford these inflation-busting pay rises.
And as well as the strikers, we've also got the problem, as we've seen, of people just not really going back to work after the pandemic. You've got a huge proportion of people of working age choosing to drop out of the workforce. What does the government do about that? Or is it just a question of people are lazier than they once were?
Well, I think the government has tried to introduce some policies around more work coaches, particularly for over 50s that have decided that they just want to stay at home. This is the majority of people that make up this group of people who are economically inactive, I think they're being called. And of course, this feeds into the labour shortages that we were discussing earlier. One of the big things holding up the British economy are labour shortages. We've got to get British people back into work, but also where there are acute labour shortages, we've got to bring in hard-working people from abroad to plug those gaps whilst we train up the British population.
I mean, that's exactly what a points-based migration system is supposed to do, be able to be flexible to those particular demands.
But is that compatible with the sort of Tory majority? We know that there are plenty of people in red wall constituencies who were actually worried about high levels of immigration and wanted to see net migration reduced, and that's why they voted for Brexit. So how does Rishi Sunak square that?
I think Rishi Sunak's got to actually talk about the immigration figures that we saw earlier on this year, which I think you're referencing, of around 500,000, in a more analytical way. You know, a lot of those immigration numbers were coming from the Ukrainian support scheme, were coming from the British National Overseas Scheme with Hong Kong, were coming from the Afghanistan resettlement scheme, and then some students, and then around 150,000 economic migrants. Obviously, these are still big numbers, but if we actually talk about the numbers in a more analytical way, I think the British public will be understanding, because ultimately, as I was mentioning earlier on, you know, businesses having to close because they can't get the staff isn't acceptable. The economy's stifling because businesses can't get the staff isn't acceptable.
I don't believe a single British person would reject a visa for a Malaysian nurse or an Indian doctor. I think that these are the kind of things that, you know, sector by sector, exactly what a points-based system is supposed to deliver, rather than just the open door to anyone. Doing it sector by sector, I think there is a case that the government can make here for those shortage occupation lists to be filled.
It's not making it that strongly at the moment.
It's not making any case strongly at the moment. Well, happy Christmas. After the break, for many thrifty shoppers, Boxing Day is the perfect opportunity to find some great deals. But is there an appetite for shopping after Christmas during this cost of living crisis? Well, we'll be going live. The views of the shopping. We'll be going live to Leeds to get the views of shoppers there. See you shortly.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
It's 11:25 on Boxing Day morning, and this is Tom Harwood and Olivia Utley standing in for Bev Turner on GB News.
Well, December is the biggest month of the year for most UK retailers, but data from the ONS Retail Sales Index shows that that November makes up over 1/5 of this year's sales.
If you've received money as a Christmas gift, you would expect to bag some Boxing Day bargains now the sales are on.
But this year is different. The value of goods being purchased during the Boxing Day sales is predicted to be nearly 10% lower than last year.
Our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley is live on the High Street in Leeds for us. So, Anna, how busy is it where you are today?
Good morning. Well, it's certainly got busier than it was first thing this morning. I've noticed that a lot of shops are actually opening later, so around 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, rather than the 6 a.m. opening times we've seen before with stores like Next. And that could well be that stores like Next, Marks & Spencer and John Lewis have decided not to open today but tomorrow instead. Footfall has increased, but it's not as much as I expected to see. You know, the cost of living, that may have put a lot of people off, people without that spare income to spend. And this is what people had to say that I spoke to about their shopping habits today. So what brings you out today?
Just going out with my dad because we're going shopping.
And what kind of bargains are you looking for?
Just anything that's cheaper than it would be usually.
And what's brought you out into the shops rather than buying online to get these deals?
Because you got to pay postage for the deliveries and stuff, so it's just better to come out here.
So it's the Boxing Day sales. What's brought you out today?
Look, we're over visiting from Australia actually, so we are trying to get some bargains, and we have her little boy's birthday tomorrow, so we thought we'd be smart and do the shopping today.
And what have you picked up on? Have you seen many deals?
I think there's some deals. There's a bit less places open than I would have liked to have seen. We're used to it being a bit more open in Australia than it is here, so there's not quite the buzz we were expecting, but there are some really good deals, particularly like somewhere like Boots. There was a lot of really good sets that are like the Christmas gift packs that were very cheap.
So people there saying that they did expect it to be busier, but they'd seen some really good deals on in the shops compared to online, so that they were glad that they'd come out to do their shopping today, and we'll keep you updated throughout the day.
Well, Anna, thank you so much. I hope it's not too cold on the high street there in Leeds, but yes, we will be catching up with you throughout the day. Thank you. Let's bring in now the political commentator, Albie Amankona, who's with us through the whole show. And Albie, I just was watching that package there, listening to the views of those people saying they were hoping it would be better. They were disappointed that shops were closed. It just feeds into this sense of malaise that the country's not really in a great place right now.
I think when it comes to retail, I think one of the trends that we have been seeing for decades now is this shift from physical retail to online. And what we saw during the pandemic was really that speed up. So these big queues of Boxing Day sales, people getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get the train or drive into town to go and queue outside of Next or Debenhams or House of Fraser, which have now disappeared from the high street, may be behind us. But I think one of the things that might be cause for positivity is because we saw a less than good sales environment before Christmas, actually a lot of these stores have a lot more stock left over than they would have done usually, which means there's better deals out on the high street today than there would have been in previous years. So what I would say, if you're at home watching television, as soon as we finish, get out onto your local high street and get
midday.
those deals.
Do not turn off the television until midday.
That's
sorry, that was
news. No, quite right. I mean, that's fantastic news for shoppers, of course, if people didn't buy before Christmas and they're buying now. But it's not brilliant news for the retailers themselves. How will those small businesses fare in 2023? 2022 was called the year of the squeeze. Will we expect just to see more and more shops closing on the high street, do you reckon?
I think 2023 will be a year of a bigger squeeze. You know, inflation is scheduled to come down this year, but it's still running high. We're seeing sort of high single digits, low double digit figures of inflation, and that's going to be hitting people in their wallets, so they won't have as much money to spend on the high street. But if we can get that inflation number down, if the recession comes to a close at the end of this year, as many forecasters are predicting, perhaps 2024 can be a better year for retailers. The question is, can those smaller businesses, those family-run businesses, get through a really tricky 2023?
And this is the big gamble for Rishi Sunak, I suppose. Everything counts on inflation really crashing next year. It's predicted to do so. If that happens, then maybe all of these strikes sort of melt away a bit. We get new pay settlements with a more reasonable level of inflation. Really, really big gamble, though, for him to take.
Big hope, yeah.
Well, after the break, house clean. How clean is your house star? Aggie Mackenzie will be joining us to talk about the big post-Christmas clean-up. That's after your morning news.
Good morning, it's 11:31. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. Jersey police have confirmed a woman who was injured in an explosion at a block of flats in Jersey earlier this month has died in hospital on Christmas Day. 73-year-old Kathleen McGuinness's death brings the total number of people killed in the incident to 10. The blast, which took place just after 4 a.m. on the 10th of December, destroyed the building in St Helier. An inquest into the deaths will open this Friday before being adjourned while the investigation into the incident continues. At least 30 people are believed to have died as a result of a severe Arctic freeze that continues to grip much of the US and Canada. Officials say the worst hit area is the city of Buffalo in New York State. Amid the snow, ice and freezing temperatures, thousands of flights have been cancelled and more than 150,000 homes are still without power. Russia's defence ministry claimed 3 of its military personnel have been killed at an airbase hundreds of miles from the front line of its war with Ukraine. Moscow alleged they were hit by falling debris from a Ukrainian drone that it says was shot down. It's the second attack on the airbase this month. It's understood the site stores long-range strategic bombers. Kyiv hasn't yet commented on the incident. And the UK's rail networks are effectively shut down today as members of the RMT union hold a fresh round of strike action in a dispute over pay. Hundreds of trains usually run on Boxing Day, but they've all been cancelled and thousands of people have been forced to make alternative plans. The AA expects 15.2 million cars on UK roads today. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Tom and Olivia will be back in just a moment.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Good morning, happy Boxing Day. It's 11:35 or just 11:36 and you're with Tom Harwood and Olivia Utley standing in for Bev Turner today here on GB News.
You've been sending in your views, which are of course most important to us of all. Pete, hello Pete, says unions just want to bring down the government and are not really interested in their members.
That's interesting because of course that's what Steve Headley was almost implying, that this was a more societal struggle than just simply about terms, pay and conditions, that this was almost about changing the economic system of the country. We're talking to a former member of the RMT executive.
Yeah, which is a view that the unions are claiming that they're not coordinating these strikes, but certainly there are some at the top who think this is a sort of project about overthrowing capitalism.
Well, Gary has written in with a suggestion saying that the workers striking are all public sector workers with good pensions. They certainly are. Why don't they give up some of their pensions to facilitate their wages? I'm not quite sure how that would work in terms of future commitments of payments that could be delivered now, but I mean, maybe they could look into it.
And Marianne's written in pushing back. Steve Headley, from former chief of the RMT, was on talking about how perhaps we should be spending less money on the people in Ukraine. She disagrees. She says, shame on Steve Headley. How can you make a comparison with a railway worker earning an average wage of 37k to the abhorrent suffering of those in Ukraine? It's shameful.
I think that is a pertinent point, particularly when it comes to those who work on the railways. Many of them are in quite well-paid jobs, and perhaps that's why there's less sympathy for the railway strikes compared to the nurses' strikes. Some people in the railways, I mean, if they're doing overtime and all the rest of it with all these old working conditions, they can be on 50, 80,
The median pay,
£100,000.
depending on your job, is between 37k and 58k, and the median pay in the country is 33k. So that might be a sentiment that's echoed.
Really interesting stuff. Steve in Dudley has written in to say, why can't the unions just be honest? The rail strike is all about bringing the government down. If they were honest about it, they might get some support. Well, Steve apparently wants to bring the government down, but I suppose in history, unions have brought down governments. 1973, Ted Heath's government brought down. 1979, Jim Callaghan's government brought down, mainly by these strikes.
Yes, although perhaps bringing down a Labour government from strikes is a bit easier because, you know, there's the theory that the Labour is just in the union's pocket. Maybe a Conservative government. Rishi Sunak seems to be holding out the hope that it'll be Labour who gets the blame for these strikes, but it's a vain hope so far.
Well, it certainly wasn't Labour who got the strikes in 1973 when... 1974, when Ted Heath sort of went to the country saying, who governs? That was his big election question, and the public came back with the answer...
Not you.
Not you. Well, let's get more on these issues of the day, because many of us are inundated with guests, piles of presents and endless food over the Christmas break. But what should you do with all of those leftovers?
From donating unwanted presents and tackling the huge post-Christmas clean-up, we have Aggie Mackenzie, a cleaning expert and presenter of How Clean Is Your House, with us this morning to give us all the tips and tricks. So, Aggie, where do we begin?
Where do you begin? I know, well, it depends on how many people... My top tip always is, if somebody else offers to do Christmas, go there. Then you haven't got all the cleaning up to do. But essentially, it's a case of delegating, number one, get everyone involved, give everyone jobs, and set a timer. You've got so much time to do so much cleaning. But you might find that, you know, the oven needs a good clean, and it's a good time of year to do it. You know, after the Christmas roast has been in, there's probably a lot of spillages then. Get it done now, otherwise that grease will get baked on. It just is harder to do. Similarly, with any stains on your carpet or upholstery, sort them now, because the longer you leave them, the harder they are to remove in the longer term. In terms of like wrapping paper and stuff, it's a really good idea to recycle it, but you can't recycle all wrapping paper. And so a good way of knowing whether it's recyclable or not is to scrunch the wrapping paper in your hand, and if it stays in a ball, then that's good for recycling. But if it kind of unravels, that's a clue that it's plastic, so it goes into your general household rubbish.
That is such an interesting trip, and I had no idea. So perhaps you should sort of have two bin bags of wrapping paper, one for the recycling and one for otherwise. What about all of those, all of the wrapping for all of those presents? Because especially if there are little children in your gathering, there's going to be a whole host of perhaps plastic wrap, cardboard wrap, all the rest of it. And that's almost as much as the wrapping paper.
I know, indeed it is. And also, I think if you have small children and they've got far too many presents, I think a good idea would be to just kind of put some of them to one side for later in the week, month or year. Because if the kids are overwhelmed with too much stuff, then they can't see the value of anything. It all gets messy and difficult. The other thing is, we've all got too much food at this. Well, a lot of us have too much food at this time of year. And, it's all kind of falling off the fridge shelves and all the rest of it. So my tip is to make good use of your freezer. Most things can be frozen, even milk. So if you've got too much milk and it's about to run out, what you do is you write, with a Sharpie pen on the label, like if it's got 4 days left or 3 days left or whatever, put it in the freezer so that when you take it out, you know how much life the milk has. Because once you put it in the freezer, it kind of arrests the deterioration of the milk. So when you bring it back out again, you know how much time you've left on that milk. And, you can freeze mostly anything. You just wrap it up, in foil, plastic as well, maybe, so that the food's protected from freezer burn.
Now, is it worth tidying the whole house up? If, for example, you're going to have sort of multiple parties, you have people over for Christmas Day, then you do another one on Boxing Day, a couple of days later you might have another family round. At what point do you sort of think, well, I'm not going to tidy the house 3 times over?
Quite, exactly. I think what you need to do is just kind of tidy it to your own level of satisfaction. Don't worry about anybody coming into the house, because essentially they're more interested in the company, food and drink, rather than what's maybe lurking in your corner. Just make sure that your bathroom's nice and clean, the taps are shiny, and that's enough. And, you know, after the whole festive period's over, that's the time to give it a good deep clean.
Now, a very specific question here, but I think there will be other people wondering this too. How are you actually supposed to get red wine out of anything? Because my granny always said salt or white wine. Hasn't seemed to work for me.
No, you're right, it doesn't. Salt will often set the stain, and white wine, you're adding more chemicals and sugar to the stain. No. So red wine stains, this works every single time. As soon as you can, you should have lots of soda water on standby. It's also great for overindulging and hangovers. Soda water. Grab the soda water, plonk it straight onto the stain, and don't worry about wetting your carpet, because carpets go through lots of washing in the manufacturing. So it's fine to add the soda water, and you'll see the stain kind of spreading. So then you get a clean white towel and work from outside in, just nice and gently. If you rub too hard, you might damage the fibres of the carpet. And keep going with the soda water and the towel, using a clean bit of towel each time, and eventually all that red wine will come out of the carpet. It's always on a beige carpet as well, isn't it, that you spill the red wine?
Always, always. And it's always when you hold a piece of jam and toast, not particularly Christmassy, but always goes down. Yeah, you can never avoid it.
I know.
Well, Aggie Mackenzie, it has been a delight and an education to have you with us here on Boxing Day. Thank you so much for giving up your time and no doubt helping many, many people who may well be hosting this Christmas. Thanks for joining us. Well, let's bring in political commentator Albi Amankona, who's been listening in throughout that interview. How messy is your house?
Well, my house at the moment is a complete bomb site because we're getting our front room renovated. So we actually didn't spend Christmas at my flat. We spent it at my grandparents' house. But I think that tip, particularly about red wine, was fantastic. I, too, was of the view that you use salt or white wine, but to know that you just use soda water and rub from the outside in, I think that's going to help millions of people.
Especially mulled wine at this time of year.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I have a very good tip for people, actually, which is... learnt it last year when I was hosting for the first time. You can use recyclable dishes to cook your turkey and your sprouts and your everything, chuck them in the oven, and if you've only got one oven, they squeeze. So instead of using metal trays that you have to wash up, that's what you spend all your time washing up with.
So these are things that sort of feel a bit like tin foil, but aren't quite. Yeah, the sort of semi-rigid.
Pound shop, costs £5, end of grease.
From the pound shop costs £5. That's inflation. That's inflation writ large, isn't it?
For all of your dishes.
Okay, yeah, no. Well, on that note, we have our next story today, which, of course, the King Charles III, gave his first Christmas speech yesterday to the nation from inside St George's Chapel in Windsor, close, of course, to where the late Queen is buried.
Let's hear from Cameron Walker, our GB News royal reporter, to tell us more about the monumental moment.
Was King Charles III's first Christmas message as monarch. In fact, it's the first televised speech that a king has done in the United Kingdom. His Majesty's grandfather and great-grandfather, King George V and King George VI, both broadcast Christmas messages, but it was on the radio rather than television. I think it's particularly significant that the King chose St George's Chapel to deliver his first Christmas message, because it was literally just metres away from the final resting place of his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, and his speech very much paid tribute to the life and service of his mother. He thanked the public for their love and support and sympathy during the national mourning period. He said he cannot thank you, as in the public, enough for the love and sympathy. He also spoke of the late Queen's everlasting light and the Queen's faith in God and in her people. And the King referred to the fact that perhaps, or at least he gave a nod to the fact that he very much wanted to continue his mother's work and her service to this country, the United Kingdom. His Majesty also paid tributes to the armed forces and emergency service workers who had worked over the period of the Queen's death, but also in the months since. I think it was particularly significant he referred to specifically the public sector workers, including teachers and emergency services, although, as I've already mentioned, because in the last month there have been public service strikes. Nurses have gone on strikes, train drivers have gone on strikes, even ambulance drivers have as well. Now, the King did not officially specifically refer to the strikes. He remained very much impartial, but he did give a slight nod to the work and the service that the public sector provide. He also referred to the cost of living crisis affecting many in Great Britain, but he paid tributes to communities who have really supported those in need. And he didn't refer to this, but we understand that His Majesty has made a private donation to a fuel poverty charity over Christmas, who are helping those struggling to pay their fuel bills over these cold winter months. Now, the King is head of state, he's head of the Church of England, and obviously Christmas is very much a Christian celebration. But the King was conscious and aware that he is head of a state which includes and welcomes many faiths. So the King referred to Christianity, clearly, and it was recorded in a church, but he also referred to synagogues, he referred to mosques, temples, gurdwaras. He wanted to include all religions in the message of Christmas, and that's one of compassion, kindness and love and inclusivity to some extent as well. And I think that theme of a multi-faith king is something we're going to see going forward throughout His Majesty the King's reign. There was no mention of Harry and Meghan. Funnily enough, he did mention the Prince and Princess of Wales, but I think it was perhaps wise that he didn't mention Harry and Meghan, because if he did, I suspect all of the headlines would be about them. But the overriding theme was that of selfless dedication, specifically referring to his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II. But I think, again, it's a theme we're very much going to see him carry on as we get closer to his coronation and then beyond, as we continue with the reign of King Charles III.
And we've just heard that speech yesterday, the King's speech, was the most watched programme of Christmas Day with, was it?
It's 8.1 million viewers. That's the number that we've been told, which is 12% of the population. Now, I'm not sure if that's particularly high or particularly low.
I would have instinctively thought it would be higher, but maybe people are just still enjoying their Christmas.
I don't know how many people tuned into the Queen's speech last year. That would be an interesting comparator. Do you think it's a high or a low number? gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address to write into. But let's get reaction to all of this, all of the Christmas news, with our political commentator, Albi Amenkona, who has been with us throughout the programme. I suppose, first of all, this speech from the King, a bit more inclusive than previous speeches, perhaps, talking about other faiths.
Yes, and not just talking about other faiths, but talking about people with no faith at all. I think that's not something that we would have seen from the Queen, who was absolutely a woman of devout faith. I mean, I'll just read out the line to you that he said. So whatever faith you have, or whether you have none, it is in this life-giving light and with true humility that lies in our service to others. And I very much am an atheist. And I think this is probably one of the first times I felt included in a Christmas speech coming from the monarch. And of course, we saw in the census figures earlier on this year that people of no faith are really growing quite fastly in numbers in this country. So perhaps it's a sign of a new style of leadership from our monarch for the years to come.
And would you have expected the King to mention Meghan and Harry, or do you think it was sensible of him to
No, I think it was very shrewd of His Majesty the King not to mention his wayward family, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, or Montecito, as we might want to call them, in his Christmas speech, because it would have just overshadowed everything. You know, this was an important speech. It's the first time that a King's speech has been broadcasted on television, because Her Majesty the Queen was the Queen for such a long time that television wasn't really something which was widely available when she first broadcast her speech. It was all on the radio. So no, I think it was a very good decision not to mention the Duke and Duchess of Sussex.
It is interesting, though, that we also heard in this speech the topic that we have been talking about predominantly through this morning's programme, and that is the struggle, some might say, of people in the face of the cost of living crisis, and indeed the strikes that we've seen. He didn't quite get political. He has been political in the past in his role as Prince of Wales. Do you think he struck the right tone there, sort of acknowledging it, but not getting into the argument?
I think he's got to tread very carefully when he starts speaking about the plight of public sector workers. Because of the political discourse that's going on at the moment, it's hard not to be political when you're talking about public sector workers. There was no mention necessarily of family-run businesses, private sector workers also feeling the pinch at this time of year, and indeed also struggling through the cost of living crisis. So one might argue that that was political. So I would say to, you know, the advisors and the speechwriters just to tread very carefully when we're talking about these issues that could be construed as political by certain sections of society.
It's always very difficult if you are the monarch of the country, standing in a gilded chapel, and everyone knows you of wearing sort of robes and crown jewels and all the rest of it, not that he did in the speech. It's quite hard to talk about poverty when you're sort of holding that position.
It is hard to talk about poverty, but it's also important to note that the royal family actually do donate a lot of money to charity. I think the King himself made a number of private donations to charities this year, which obviously aren't publicised. So, yes, of course, we all know that the royal family are a very wealthy family, but they also do a lot for this country, and they provide thought leadership and they provide community and traditions that carry people through in tough economic times. And I think when we see the coronation next year, we're going to see the nation come together to celebrate our new monarch.
Yeah, and with that coronation, there's been talk about it being a sort of scaled-down occasion to reflect the fact that we are going through a cost of living crisis. Do you think that's sensible, or is now the time to show Great Britain at its very best?
I think we've actually seen some recent reports denying that it's going to be a scaled-back coronation, which I actually think is the right decision. If we're going to have a monarchy, let's do it properly. What's the point in this scaled-back nonsense? We want it done properly. We want an amazing coronation. The first time we've seen both a king and a queen coronated this century, I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yes, I would hate to have a sort of Spanish-style monarchy where they only walk around in suits. It's like, well, what's the point of them?
Exactly.
I want to see my monarchs with ridiculous clothing on and all the gold and silver in the world. Well, let's just finally today in this programme talk about something that we brought up last hour, and that was my antics of puzzling. Now, here it is. Here's this puzzle that... I should explain the background to this. My sister got this puzzle for her boyfriend. It was a really nice thing to have done. It's a sort of make your own... This company produces a photograph of yours to become a puzzle. Trouble is, the picture she chose has rather a lot of monotone blue in it. And so I think we've got another picture here of really trying to get through this puzzle where all of the pieces looked exactly the same, but...
I think you did a stellar job, given the
Well, we left the audience on a bit of a cliffhanger here at the end of the last hour. Was the puzzle finished? Did all of these identical-looking pieces actually, in our sort of slightly less than sober way, manage to be fit? And I believe there it is, the finished picture. Absolutely, yeah. So I'm really glad that we managed to do that. But note to anyone doing any of those make-your-own puzzle things, perhaps big blank bits of singular colour blocks are not the wisest way to go. Just a gentle hint. But I'm not the only one that's been hitting the puzzles this Christmas. Miranda and David have sent this in to gbviews at gbnews.uk.
And this puzzle took them 11 hours on a rainy day, and they've sent it in for us from Perth, Australia. It's great to know we've got viewers down under.
Now, that actually looks rather more complicated than the one I did. I think I've been rather shown up. Well, yeah, have you been doing puzzles this Christmas?
I am absolutely terrible at puzzles. I literally just can't put two pieces together. My mother-in-law has tried many times to get me interested. Can't do it.
Well, if it helps, I found that sort of at the end of a Christmas lunch, when you're all a bit merry, that's almost the confidence that you need.
Yeah, I need those four-piece ones for toddlers. That's my goal.
Well, I have to say, the one we did last night, it was a 500-piece one. Ooh. This evening, I have got a 1,000-piece puzzle. It's of the London Tube map, which I absolutely adore.
Right up your street.
And one for absolute nerds. It's got the Northern Line extension and the full Elizabeth line on it too. I am over the moon.
And on that note, wherever you're spending your Christmas, have a wonderful Boxing Day. That's it from us on GB News Live.
Yes, coming up next, it's Mark Longhurst. See you tomorrow.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know